Welcome to Black Beat Podcast, y'all. It's your host, John Washington, editor-in-chief of Flossin Media, right here in Portland, Oregon, where we've been keeping it real for the last 20 years. The podcast is where we dive deep, though, no holes, into the issues that shape the lives and the future of blacks and BIPOC communities. But before we dive into this issue, let's make sure y'all click the button on the bottom of to subscribe to Flossin TV on the YouTube, and it's free for you to help us out a lot. It'll help us out a lot, y'all. Today, we're zeroing in on a massive project in our own backyard that's stirring up community dialogue, the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. And who better than to school us on this, on the ins and outs, than the man who is at the helm of this architectural titan? His name is Mr. Greg C. Johnson. That's right, Greg Johnson's in the studio today. Greg is a seasoned leader with over 2 decades of transportation, both in the public eye and behind the scene. Has been crafting the future of how we move from Maryland to Michigan, and now right here connecting Oregon and Washington. Greg is a pioneer, a new interstate bridge, to not just stand up for the how we shape this deal, but how we're opening up the economic revenues in ways that we've never seen. But Greg, he's not just about beams and bolts. He pushes the bridge. He's hoping that the bridge built by many and for all, a workforce reflective of the community it serves. Welcome to Black Beat, Greg. We appreciate you being here, my brother.
Welcome.
John, thank you so much.
It's
my pleasure to be here. You just don't know.
Well, I'm sure glad about it, man, because I'm about to get rid of some of these here conservative realities, and we about to dive into this here the way I like to do this here. You hear?
I'm ready.
Let's do the dance. You know, so Greg, come on, man. Here you are. You're in the studio. You're in Oregon. Man, how you get here? Talk to us a little bit about where you come from. Who is you, man? Where your daddy and your mama? All that stuff.
So John, like most African-American families, our family started off in the South. My dad was from South Carolina. He was a sharecropper.
Man, right on, bro.
He made it all the way through the 9th grade. He was one of the smartest men I knew, and he's still my hero. He's been passed away now for over 12 years.
Wow.
But everything I do, I keep him in mind to make sure I'm taking his name and highlight.
Yeah, you got that South Carolina thing looking in your face. That sharecropper look. I got you, boy. Well, welcome. You know, and because skin color is kind of interested in America. You understand me? Yeah. And where some of us is from, you may not be able to tell it or not, but we can tell where you from, bro. We appreciate you. You hear?
Well, and I gotta say, my mom.
Yeah.
My mom is from Tuskegee, Alabama.
Oh wow, boy!
And like I said, my technical, strategic things I get from my father, but my people skills I get from my mother.
Your mom's had a way of dealing with this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Dad was. So your father and all of them, they matriculated up north.
Yeah.
They left from the South. They moved to north. Where they go?
They went to the Detroit, Michigan area to work in the auto factories. So my father worked for General Motors for 32 years.
Yeah, right on, B.
So
this episode of Black Beat Podcast is brought to you in part by the University of Oregon. Mighty doesn't follow trends; it sets them. Be mighty, be Oregon.
Man, so now you're here. And we got you finally. Yeah. So how'd they get you, man? What was that? What got you here?
So John, this is my coming on my 42nd year in this industry. I've been doing infrastructure and transportation for over 42 years, and I was I worked at the Michigan Department of Transportation. Started off as an entry-level engineer, and when I retired in 2015 from Michigan DOT, I was a deputy director of the entire department. And so I retired, And I've been failing retirement because I went out to Maryland.
Good luck.
And I ran Maryland State Highway Administration.
Wow.
And I lived in Baltimore, lived in downtown Baltimore, and John, let me tell you, loved it. Detroit and Baltimore are two great cities that get a lot of grief.
I'm telling you, isn't there something, man? Baltimore just don't get a good rating, man, for nothing, man. I don't understand it, man.
But
beautiful place.
And lovely people. Now, like Detroit, it has its challenges, but I learned so much there, and I still have great friends there. And I would probably still be there, but my mom took sick back in Michigan, and it was an 8-hour drive, and I was making that drive like every week to go back and see Mom. But I said, it's time to come home, see about my mom.
Yeah,
so
great.
So I retired again.
Wow. Wow, bro.
And then the private sector came calling. They said, we'll have you home all the time, so that's not an issue, but we want you to do some things. So I worked in the private sector for a large consulting firm for 3 years. And then, come 2020, it was like the pandemic had hit. My mom had passed away, and I think I said, boy, I need to see something else.
Life change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so somebody came and tapped me on the shoulder and said, boy, there's this project out in Portland and Vancouver that could use your skill set. And I said, well, I've never been to Portland a day in my life, but I'll talk to them. And so I interviewed with them, and some of the things they said really interested me. They said, we don't want this to be a typical DOT project where you just build concrete and steel and you're done. This project is going to be rooted in equity and going to be rooted in climate.
Wow.
And that interested me.
Wow.
Because all my career, I've been fighting for inclusion of people who have been marginalized and not had a decision in how transportation impacts their lives.
Wow. So we're going to transition on that one. I wanted to hold up, make sure that we got a little bit more about your background on that one. But, man, that's really where the meat of it is, I'm sure. But I'm really motivated to get there. So you transitioned. You went to school back in Detroit, right?
Yeah.
You
University
come up,
of Michigan.
Right.
Okay.
You
Go Wolverines, national champs.
Man, don't even try it. Don't even try it. I ain't mad at them. The Georgia Bulldogs be trying to get a little bit more angry. So what was it like, man, coming up back then, coming out, with a degree, in engineering and, and your background and working and coming through? What was that all like, man, for you?
John, the first thing, there are not nearly enough African-American or minority voices in the transportation world. And transportation impacts us every day.
Every day.
If you get out and you step off your front porch and there ain't a sidewalk in front of your house and you're walking in the street, some of those decisions have been made for you.
Yeah, man.
And I was always interested in, okay, how can we make this better? I've sat in living rooms in some of the poorest neighborhoods in Detroit to make sure that those voices get heard in some of the decisions that go on. So,
but what prompted you, man? Some of us, a fire in the house make us want to be a fireman. Always we see a football and cheerleaders on the TV or basketball. We want to go back. Man, what made you decide to pick one of the hardest directions to go in?
So I tell you, my father inspired me. My father, once again, he only had a 9th grade education, but he built the house that we grew up in. That house is still standing.
Wow, man.
50 years later. He wired it. He put the bricks on it. He built the framing. He put the roof on it.
But all too familiar.
And he, like I said, he was one of the smartest folks I knew.
Well, it sounded like you inherited a little bit of something from him,
And so in the 6th grade, I took a industrial arts class where they had us doing drafting. And it's like, wow, I kind of like this. Back then, African-American families, if you were, and I was first generation in my family to go to college, and none of my siblings did, none of my generations ever went to college. So, the thought was, well, you're going to be a doctor.
Oh, man. Yeah. Boy, tell the story, young man. Tell the story.
Well, and like I said, doctor's all right. but I ain't too keen on sick folks.
Yeah.
Blood and all that.
And all that mess.
Yeah,
So,
you know. I might knock you out, but I ain't trying to see no blood. You know.
But engineering was the path that I chose because of, like I said, my father was always tinkering. Like I said, he could repair any car. He could build anything. And so that inspired me. So when I went off to college, engineering was my choice. And I haven't regretted a day of that.
No, was the pathway kind of challenging for you? Was the course track a challenging course track? Would you encourage others to go into the course track? What?
I would. And John, how I pay it forward, I'm currently working with a couple of students who go to historically black colleges and universities, making sure that they have meaningful internships. Because that was one of the challenges when I was in school. I didn't know anything about internships.
Yeah.
But that's how you learn what you like, and it gives you inspiration for your course choices.
Right on, man.
As you move forward. So,
right on,
so I believe in going back to those students and even catching students in junior high and high school and telling them that taking a technical, a STEM education will never fail you. Even if you go into something totally different, having that background is valuable to you.
Right on, Greg. I mean, because you confirmed one thing about when you get it, you can't keep it, and not unless you're giving it away.
Yeah.
You know. So let's get into that professional journey that you're on. I mean, you've held significant roles both in Maryland and Michigan before making this transition to this project. Could you compare these experiences? I mean, what was the key lessons that you learned in your past roles, you know, that you're bringing to this bridge project?
Well, one of the things that I carry with me everywhere I go is a sense of fairness and equity, and making sure that folks understand what these transportation investments mean for them and how they can be a part of it. So in Michigan, once again, working in Detroit, the largest African-American concentration of folks in any city in the country. And folks did not understand some of the choices that were being made for them. So my goal was to make sure that they had a voice, that we were reaching out and understanding. We were building or planning the Gordie Howe Bridge, which is a $5 billion bridge from Detroit to Windsor, Canada.
Whoa.
And, you know, the area in Detroit where it landed, once again, one of the poorest sections of the city. And that's the section of the city that had the wastewater treatment plant. It had
I
oil
remember that.
refinery,
Remember that, yeah.
all of those things. And here we come saying, well, this is the narrowest part of the river. This makes the most sense to put a bridge.
Yeah.
And so we talked to folks. We made sure they understood what their rights were. And John, a lot of it goes back to my dad. When we were growing up, we lived north of Detroit, and the predecessor of Michigan DOT came along and bought my father's house.
Wow.
And he was always, he told me the story even before I understood what it was about, how unfairly he felt he was treated in that interaction. And that story stays with me. And that's why, you know, bringing equity to the table, bringing inclusion to the table is part of who I am.
So how did that play out in the past, back in these other projects, Greg? I mean, you at least had a constituency in both of those places that had a fair a population of blacks in them. But now you've come into the Northwest, which is to some degree slated as one of the whitest places in the country. And with this notion of equity and inclusion, are you seeing what are you seeing as the differences with the types of equity and inclusion when you're thinking about something back in Baltimore or back in Detroit versus now that you're here in Oregon?
John, I think one of the differences I see with the smaller population here in Portland, folks are more focused.
Yeah.
You look at what's happening on the Rose Quarter with historic Albina. folks understand what happened when the interstate first came through.
Yeah,
and
man.
how it disrupted
eminent domain.
African-American
Look, we coming
lives.
through here. Let me, y'all. Look, if it ain't glued down, we taking it.
What's the old saying? You ain't gotta
Yeah.
go home, but you gotta
Yeah,
get the
got
hell
to get
out
out.
of here.
That was about exactly what it was.
But I think that there is a good focus in the African American community about, okay, we absorbed all of the negative things. You displaced our homes. You didn't give us jobs, because I can almost guarantee you that nobody that looked like us worked on that project when I-5 was coming through. Nobody like us had construction companies that were working and building wealth for them, their family, and their community.
Yeah, that generational inheritance of that wealth. Yeah, man.
So those are the things that I carry with me. And with this program, when they said, okay, we're going to have a focus on equity, and I hear the flack from folks. There ain't no such thing as a racist road or bridge.
Yeah.
There ain't no racist road or bridge, but the circumstances around how those things were, how decisions were made, are rooted in race.
Wow. Yeah, and not to mention that before we run too far through the weeds, we talked a little bit about Baltimore, man. What was your thoughts about that bridge and its collapse? And
the first thing is, I crossed that bridge so many times. So when I was in Maryland, actually that section of the
that was sorry, but that was a new bridge, wasn't it?
No,
it wasn't rebuilt. It wasn't rebuilt.
It was built in the 70s.
Yeah.
I thought it was rebuilt again. Okay.
No,
right.
it was built in the 70s. So it wasn't a terribly old bridge, given the aging of our infrastructure here in the U.S. But it was under the control of the Maryland Toll Authority rather than state highway. So, but I had driven across it numerous times, and to see that bridge go down, it was, like I said, it was disturbing.
Man, like a house of dominoes, boy. It just went. I couldn't believe nothing like that there. So in an effort like that, well, we're going to get to that question there. Okay, with the IBR program, there's a lot of talk about creating a diverse workforce historically. There's always been a lot of chatter about it. Mega projects tend to sideline minority-owned businesses. Can you sort of give us a little bit of a thought around how you going to uplift the black and minority contractors and workers throughout this decade-long project? What you got any thoughts about how you got a plan about that?
I do, John. And the first thing is having knowledge. So I have made it a mission while I'm out here is to have an open door policy for every small or minority-owned business to come see me, come talk to me, and tell me what you can do, and I'll tell you what our program is, and let's see how that matches up with your skill sets or where you want to go. So I've had great conversations with a number of minority contractors, and we actually are having a industry event on May 6th.
Wow.
That we're going to have the big prime contractors from all over the country, and in some cases all over the world. We're inviting to come and understand more about this project, where it's going. But we're also inviting the DBE community, disadvantaged business enterprise community, black-owned, Hispanic-owned, women-owned firms to come in and start the matchmaking process of getting folks on teams that can help build this project.
Okay.
So we are dedicated, number one, to informing people about it. Two, we're starting to look at, okay, what's the gap in skills or in resources that's necessary for a firm to work on a project like this. So we're putting forward some training. We're working with OWAMI.
There you go.
We're working with the National Association of Minority Contractors, the Tabor 100 up in Washington, so we can understand what the gap is and what things we may need to provide training for to get folks ready to work on this.
Yeah, there's that engineer brain going on. I mean, because after all, when we've looked at this for years now, man, and I think that sometimes what we tend to do is assume that a building starts at the 15th floor of the building and then builds up from there, right? There's an assumption that we don't have to go down to the foundation, right, and look at where the kinks are. And so I really encourage that what you're talking about right now, because it's a necessity. I remember most of the projects that we have developed around locally, we came into a problem. We had black development going on, but we didn't know what black development looked like, right? And most of the buildings have crowns on them. Most of the developers have a signature on a building. We didn't know what black art was, all that kind of stuff, so we had to come all the way back to Yob in Detroit to figure out how some of this stuff was working, but now we came forward a little bit, but still there's that continuum of services, right? And then the question constantly is, how far can we unpack construction, right? It's always seems to be, at least in the Northwest, construction is limited to just construction. It stays within a body of people that are just construction. But we do know that media and a bunch of other things are associated with these development projects, but the project never seems to unpack itself out all the way to that. It just stays within a limited scope.
So, John, that's a great point. And one of the things we purposely did we have a what's called a general engineering consulting firm that's helping the two DOTs move this project forward. And we challenged them. We said, first off, 15% is what we expect you to bring to the table of minority and women-owned firms. They said, okay, we'll do you one better. We're going to bring you 20%. And they are hitting that goal.
Both sides?
Yeah, so it's one contract that encapsulates both Washington and Oregon. But one of the success stories is a local firm, African-American-owned firm called Espousal Strategies.
Yeah.
John L.
JJ. I know John.
Yeah. And John L's firm has grown from, I think, 3 people when he first came on the program. Now he's over 21 folks.
Right on, man.
Those are the things that we are trying to focus on to make sure that it's not just the construction. There are a lot of other skills that are necessary to get a program like this up and running and to get it built. So we're looking at how we can reach out and get folks involved. We have, John, as simple as things like the catering that we do for some of our events. Finding African-American-owned and minority-owned catering firms. The firm that prints our business cards is a minority-owned firm.
Right on.
So we're trying to look everywhere we can to make sure that those things where there's opportunities, number one, folks know about it, and number two, we are being proactive in getting them on the project.
Right, and not just one-offs, not just these one-offs. Is to go deep and wide, so that we build foundations. You're a bridge builder, you know about foundational building. But as we've been going through this interview, Greg, it's a fascinating thing, is because the nature of bridge itself, man, and then, here you is right now, we talking about these things, and just the whole, your focus is about these bridges that connect 2 locations, but 2 different locations, and the fact that you're actually connecting 2 states and having to deal with 2 different states and the way they function, boy, your plate must be pretty interesting, I think. What is that like, dealing with 2 different, municipalities, right? Different views on how they approach, or does it come under one umbrella at some point in time in terms of the focus?
John, let me tell you, you say 2. We have 10 partners. I have 10 bosses.
Whoa. Wow. 10.
Yeah. So we have the 2 cities, Portland and Vancouver.
Right.
We have the 2 state DOTs, Washington State DOT, Oregon DOT.
Wow.
We have the 2 ports, Port of Vancouver, Port of Portland, that have facilities right in our corridor.
Right.
We have the 2 metropolitan planning organizations on each side of the river that have involvement. And we have the 2 transit agencies on each side. So it is tremendously complex.
Wow.
And once again, on the Gordie Howe Bridge, we were dealing country to country.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it
even
was
more
not as complicated as this.
Wow.
Wow.
So,
Wow. And so, Greg, being at the helm on these things, I mean, what does that look like, man, on a day, like a day-to-day, coming into office? I mean, what does something like that look like, man?
So first you have to have the technical skills to understand the technical issues that are being thrown in front of you. Some people want to build a tunnel, and I have to go and explain to them why a tunnel does not work in this location. But then probably the key part
Like
is,
under the river
yeah,
tunnel?
under the river.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we can talk some more about that. But the key part is being out in the community, being able to convince folks that this is the right thing to do. And the project, so we're building on a project that got started 15, 20 years ago. So we're building on that legacy. But the one thing I think that didn't happen was the extensive outreach, the community engagement that this program is doing. So we're doing some unique things that did not happen the last time. John, I can almost guarantee you that no one from that previous program came and spoke to you.
And that's you got that right.
And
you got that right, bro.
It's intentional to go out and make sure that we are talking to different constituencies who ride on this bridge every day.
Yeah, man.
And who will be impacted.
Yeah.
by it.
Hey, me and Alex took the tour.
Yeah, I was
And I'm sorry I missed you guys. I was
that's all
out of
right.
town.
Because I didn't want to embarrass myself. Man, I got some fears. And one of them is heights, boy. They got me running around over there. Anyway, we'll talk about it.
I should have took you up to the top.
Well,
No,
they
we got pretty high.
They tried to.
Knee
But
started
that's all right,
cracking
my
a
brother.
little
I
bit.
said,
So.
this is where I end. I get on my boat before I get up on the top of this building.
But you know what's funny, Greg? I grew up not too far from the bridge. I grew up right over here in this neighborhood.
Yeah.
And we always hopped on and off the bridge, going to Seattle and things like that. And I never once paid attention to it like I did when I got on that tour. When you get your feet on there and you're actually going up, and the gentleman that took us on a tour was extremely knowledgeable about the history about it, and you don't realize it. But now, whenever I'm crossing it, I'm sitting there thinking about everything he said. Like one of the biggest things that caught my attention was how the foundation, the bridge is over 100 years old, and then the foundation that it was built on was old timber or whatever, like
Douglas
fir.
fir.
So now when I'm crossing over, I can't help but think about that, because I'm like, man, is this gonna hold me up or what, Then we hear about the whole Francis Scott Key Bridge and all that stuff. But then one thing that really struck my attention was how I-5 coming all the way from San Diego, going all the way up to Canada, and how that's a major artery, right? You're going through all these big neighborhoods, all these through cities, and these truckings that are moving things along throughout our country. And how they have that once they reach that bridge and they have that compaction there, they can't move along. Like
it is the only stoplight on I-5 between Mexico and Canada. As a matter of fact, so I-5 is the only freeway that connects Mexico and Canada. I-15 starts just slightly north of the Mexican border, and it goes up to Canada. But this is the only one all the way border to border, and it's that bridge. It's the only lift bridge on the interstate system west of the Mississippi.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that shows you what a unique set of circumstances we're dealing with.
Yeah, and when I was growing up, you never had to consider traffic when you were crossing it. But now that the city's grown on both sides, I mean, one of our colleagues here, he lives in Vancouver, and he's always trying to make sure he gets out of here by 3 o'clock because he knows what that traffic is going to look like, So, but I mean, I don't want to stray too much off the workforce piece. But I mean, if you could give us a little more information about as far as, did you guys finalize the plan for the design? Because I think when we went on the tour, they were kind of still trying to figure out what direction they were going to go in. And
so we have to go through this environmental process. It's called the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA. And so we are still in that stage. So no designs are finalized, but we are moving towards that as we're going to be having public hearings and release this draft supplemental document probably later this year, where folks will have public hearing. Everybody will have a chance to weigh in on it and say, boy, we love this or we hate that, and give us their take on it. We have to answer every question that comes in. We're anticipating probably over 10,000 different responses. But once we do that, and we will have to then propose and say, okay, this is what we heard from the public. This is what we're proposing to build for final. We'll take all the other stuff off the table and say, this is it. And then we'll get to the final part of this. And then we will we'll start building it hopefully late 2025, early 2026.
But what is set in stone is we're not shutting down the bridge. We're just going to keep that open while, was it like 200 feet to the
to the
west?
To the west.
To the west is where we're going to start construction. So, yeah, I mean, 200 feet didn't look like too much to me when you're standing right there, because you're like, man, I like, you know, it's going to be right next to it. So
it will appear right next to it, because the scale of the equipment that's necessary to build a bridge of this size is going to be huge.
And it's going to feed right into downtown Vancouver, right? I mean, they've got a lot of cool stuff happening there, and we've got all our stuff that we've got building on this side of town. So, you know, I'm super excited to see what that's going to look like.
Yeah, we've been working with the neighborhood and the community groups to say, okay, what's the future plan, and how can we build something that is complementary rather than destructive to the plans. And one good example, the last time this project was being talked about, we were talking about running light rail right through downtown Vancouver.
Wow.
This time, Vancouver said, whoa, whoa, whoa. We have done some neat stuff with our downtown. So now we've changed that alignment to run right along the I-5 corridor on the west side of I-5 up to Evergreen Street. And that's where it will terminate, right at Evergreen Street.
Greg, why light rail, in light of the fact that high-speed rail is a real conversation around the world these days? I mean, why light rail? So
light rail is actually complementary to high-speed rail. High-speed rail is for the longer distances. So when you're talking about, and the conversation is talking about coming from Vancouver, British Columbia, going down to Eugene, Oregon.
Right.
So our system will hopefully have spurs that will feed into and get folks to those high-speed rail terminals, but it will not be across this bridge.
Got you. Now, as we've been keeping track of this project, Rick, for quite a long time now, and the conversation in the beginning was these issues and topics about tolling, right? and then, you know, I guess the conversation ended when the governorship ended. You know, we had a lot of dialogue going on with that at the table, but now the new governor came in, put a kibosh on this issue about tolling. How you guys navigating that conversation these days?
So there is nuance to what Governor Kotek did. She took Oregon out of the game of tolling on I-205 and I-5 south of the bridge. But the governor made it clear she is still in favor of tolling I-5 bridge to help pay for the bridge.
Right on. So, I guess when it comes down to money, figure it out, right? You know.
Yeah. So.
And Oregon drivers are not used to tolling.
And that's the funny part. When this bridge was originally built in 1917, it was tolled.
Okay.
And then when they built the second span in 1958, it was tolled until the early 1970s.
Okay.
So there's a history of tolling at this location to help pay for the infrastructure.
Cool.
So, but the difference nowadays is we're looking at tolling, how can we make it equitable and fair for folks? And one of the things that we're looking at, will there be a low income discount for folks? Will there be exemptions? For instance, tribal members have said, this was our land, we ceded it to you. We should not have to pay to cross from
well, they figure it out, boy. But for somebody who didn't know much about negotiations earlier in the day, was trading beads and all that, guys, but they done caught on real fast on how to get at the trough when the trough is started, you know.
Well, let me tell you, I have a tremendous respect for the tribal governments and what they have endured in this country.
Yes.
And
the Northwest is no different, boy.
Yeah.
But they got game up here, though, boy.
oh yeah,
You know,
let me tell you, every time I go by that casino,
Yeah.
it's like,
they got game, bridges and games. You know, they seem to be pretty interesting. Vision of the future for the future, man.
Yeah.
Talk to me, Greg, about. I mean, even though there's still a bunch of mitigating conversation that needs to be addressed around environmental justice and social justice and all that, before you get into the future, talk to me a little bit about what your plans is around the environmental justice, the social justice aspects, and why is that becoming important for you to carry that message through, and why is it important for ODOT to make sure, or the IBR to make sure that this is a real significant reality?
So, John, it goes back to how the interstates were initially sited and built. Once again, you can go across the country. I can take you to Detroit and talk about I-375 that plowed through Black Bottom. Here, the Albina community. I can take you to Mobile, Alabama. I can take you to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where decisions were made back then to site interstate freeways through minority communities. I can take you to LA when they went through brown communities, Mexican American communities. So this is the history. And I can't undo that history. But what I can do is make sure that, number one, we don't repeat it. And number two, that we are taking folks who have absorbed all of the negative impacts of having a freeway run through their community and make sure they get some benefits this go round. Man. And those benefits look like, okay, can you be an apprentice? Can you work on this job? Can you have a career in construction? Number two, can your company work on this job? Can you play a role in being a part of building this thing, whereas before you didn't have that opportunity? So those things, along with the environmental aspects of this project, I think are just tremendously important.
You know, Greg, I've been at a lot of the tables with these kinds of conversations over the years, man, over the last 25 years here in the Northwest. And most of the time, the people who that's been having these conversations didn't have a color of skin like me, you know, and most of it sound like rhetoric, you know. And I'm sitting here listening to a brother that's really invested in this equity and this growth. Man, we appreciate you coming out here to the Northwest, taking a look at this with us, man, and trying to invest and help us grow and unpack some of the realities of you know, this state and the history of it, which is not much different than Alabama or any place else when you look at it. So, but for them to go out and beyond and find a model of your nature and to bring them into this environment with out front telling you this is what we're trying to accomplish, man, more respect to you and ODOT for doing so, and Washington for investing into this effort. Hey, man, talk to us a little bit about where we're trying to go in the future with all this. What's your future plans, man? How you know, talk to us a little bit about that.
The project itself, when we get into construction, we anticipate this is going to be 10 to 12 years of hard, expensive construction. So what the future looks like is there may be some kid who's sitting in a junior high class who may be able to journey out on this project. So we're looking at that. And one of the things that John L. Bell, one of the first things he emphasized to me was, you know, we have to be able to move people from poverty to prosperity.
Oh boy,
and
talk to me, JJ.
So there are we're looking at number one, hiring priorities by zip code, by saying, okay, if you live in a certain impoverished zip code, we're going to focus on you.
Okay.
Because I can't go back and say, okay, Albina, because Albina has been gentrified. So I got to go and I got to find out where
the people are at,
and say, okay, what are your economics, and can we get to you? Do you want to be a part of this?
Wow.
So the future is making sure that we have these benefits that are being promised that are carried through. And so we have a community benefits advisory group that we have put together to talk about what the workforce looks like, what the hiring of contractors looks like. So all those things are going to be tremendously important.
Greg, man, we appreciate that. Alex, do you have a question in your?
Yeah, I mean, I just when people are kind of thinking about this, it's not only construction that you got to think of. You don't have to have a skill only in construction. Sometimes we got to think outside the box, like around the bridge, right? Like, what does one end of the bridge look like? What does it look like on the other end? Is there some retail opportunities for you? Like keeping up with some of that information on both sides with Vancouver and Portland, right? I mean, Vancouver's been doing a lot of major redesign to that side of town, and I know they got a lot of stuff coming up, but just thinking in mind, like, what does the retail opportunity look like for me on that side? And like you said, catering opportunities, the marketing, the flyers, the consulting, all that stuff. So, how would they reach out to you to try to see what opportunities they have in the line of work they do?
So our main contact is through our website at interstatebridge.org.
Okay.
Folks can go there and they can find out how to reach out to me and how to reach out to our team. But I have seen folks who have started with a food truck on, and not a sophisticated food truck, on a project like this, and grow it into a brick and mortar restaurant.
Yeah, man.
So those type of opportunities and some other things that are off the beaten path but are tremendously important. We're going to have workers, and we're going to have workers who are women, who are the primary caregivers for their family, and they've been restricted because healthcare, but because of child care. So we're going to be looking at, okay, how can we encourage child care entities so folks can work and be a part of this project and not have this tremendous burden on their family.
Okay.
We're also looking at the transportation needs. That's one of the other twin barriers to folks working on a project. Can they get to the project? Can they get there on time? And can they get there consistently? And then if they work overtime, can they get back home?
Yeah.
So we're looking at how we can look at transportation services to get folks there. So,
Greg, there's a real issue, and I think on the national scene, man, there's a real issue in this whole issue around BIPOC and around diversity and equity. Somewhere. And I've been at this for a long time. So, I was a clinical person in the beginning of this, and then urban studies, community development, blah, 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 all throughout the process, right now in the media. But I understood that the history of most of these, what I'm seeing is the numbers are not mapping out for black males, regardless of how we want to stack it, right? We're looking at equity inclusion programs. We're looking at this. We're looking at that. But the numbers, the way we're looking for the demographic specific for black males are just not measuring out. You got a plan for that issue, man?
So a couple of strategies.
And I understand that it's kind of important that you, because around the disparity studies, man, we've been looking at these studies and they're just not reflecting. I mean, the last one that we looked at for minority contractors here in the state of Oregon is that black contractors are like 0.5%
like 0.5%
of these numbers, man, are just not showing any real marginal growth.
And that was that 0.5% was ones that actually got the contract. The ones that actually applied, I think it was only like 2 to 3% or something like that. So there's an issue with actually getting the information to apply as well as getting the contract as well.
So a couple of things that we think are going to be helpful in that way. So we've been talking to a couple of regional and larger minority-owned companies that do design work, that do construction work. We've been having a conversation with Raymore and talking about, okay, how can you help bring smaller minority companies with you to the table to help build this? And we've been telling the prime contractors, the Kiewits, the Skanskas
Yeah.
of the world, that this is the expectation. This is not a would-be nice. This is an expectation that you are going to go out and you're going to beat the bushes. You're going to develop. You're going to bring folks to the table who look like folks who haven't had a voice in this thing prior to this.
Right on. So here's Greg. Here's one. I'm gonna tee this one up for you. With a mind like yours, boy, you got a wonderful mind, boy. So here's one for you. Once the bridge is completed, what do you envision the legacy and the impact the bridge in terms of the social and racial equity milestones? What would that look like? What would you like that infrastructure or that project to have look like once you come to a conclusion with it?
So John, part of that has started already. Like I said, we've spoken of espousal strategies. Point North is another owned by a Pacific Island woman, and their firms have grown. And that's going to be the legacy in part of what this bridge project does, is that we're going to have folks who are going to be stronger, who can work on any project anywhere because they have worked on this project.
Yeah, right on, man.
But we're looking at, you had mentioned African American males. We are overrepresented in the, I'll call it the prison industry.
Yeah.
And so we are reaching out to folks like Pat Daniels to say, okay, how can we reach out to formerly incarcerated or folks who are about ready to be released? How can we get them in the pipeline for jobs? Because there is a tremendous need in the construction industry for folks to start filling these jobs.
Right.
And that is a viable source of folks.
Right on. Hey, Greg, man, this has been a real pleasure, my brother. You know, man, you have no idea. It's always good to be able to get some insight and information from someone who looks and acts and conducts himself similar to myself, you know. Well, I think it might be a trust issue. I don't know. But whatever that is, bro, it's been a real pleasure to have you in the house today, man. You know, that's a wrap on this one. But, man, we look forward to you coming back, man, and sharing with us any of the insights and the things that you want our listeners to hear and know, bro, because this has been real rewarding for us. And I hope the listeners out there are dialing in and tuning in to our special guest, Greg Johnson, y'all. Listen here. If y'all ain't heard it if y'all heard it from somebody else, you heard it straight from the horse's mouth here today. The man sitting right here at the table and giving y'all a shout out about what's to come and what he's inspired to achieve. And so that means we need to get out there and get behind him, y'all, and support what he's trying to accomplish here. And welcome this brother. And again, welcome to this episode of Black Beat Podcast. It's a wrap, y'all.
Absolutely.
We appreciate you, man.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.
Yeah,
This was fun.
Man.